get things started. Ready? Go!
Hello and welcome to Bounding Into Comics. My name is John Trent. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief at Bounding Into Comics. Today I got a story about Benedict Cumberbatch claiming he wants to make your sons into feminists, while he also responded to Sam Elliott's criticism of his Western film, The Power of the Dog. If you didn't see Sam Elliott's criticism, I'm going to give you a refresher on that. At the end of February, Elliott appeared on Mark Marone's podcast, WTF with Mark Marone, where he discussed The Power of the Dog, explaining why he didn't like the movie. And he said, I'll tell you why. I didn't like it anyway. I looked at it when I was down there in Texas doing 1883. And what really brought it home to me the other day, when I said to you I want to effing talk about it, there was a effing full-page ad out in the LA Times, and there was a review, not a review, a clip, and it talked about the evisceration of the American myth. And I thought, what the F? What the F? This is the guy that's done Westerns forever. The evisceration of the American West, they made it look like, what are all those dancers, those guys in New York that wear bow ties and not much else? Remember them from back in the day? Marone then interjects and says, oh, the Chippendales. Elliott then continues saying, yeah, that's what all these effing cowboys in that movie looked like. They're all running around in chaps and no shirts. There's all these allusions to homosexuality throughout the effing movie. Marone responds, I think that's what the movie's about. Elliott then says, well, what the F does this woman? Marone then interjects, who? Jane Campion? Campion is the director of The Power of the Dog. Elliott continues saying, yeah, she's a brilliant director, by the way. I love her work, previous work. But what the F does this woman from down there in New Zealand know about the American West? And why in the F does she shoot this movie in New Zealand and call it Montana and say this is the way it was? So that effing rubbed me the wrong way, pal. He then elaborated saying, and the myth is that they were these macho men out there with the cattle. I just come from effing Texas where I was hanging out with families, not men, but families, big, long, extended, multiple generation families that made their living and their lives were all about being cowboys. And boy, when I effing saw that, I thought, what the F? Where are we in this world today? Marone then stated, I don't know, that's the biggest issue at hand. To which Elliott countered, no, it's not the biggest issue at hand, but for me, it was the only issue because there was so much of it. Elliott then explains, I mean, Cumberbatch never got out of his effing chaps. He had 2 pair of chaps, a woolly pair and a leather pair. And every effing time he'd walk in from somewhere, I don't know where in the F, he was never on a horse, maybe once. He'd walk into the effing house, storm up the effing stairs, go lay on his bed in his chaps, and play his banjo. I was like, what the F? What the F? Where's the Western in this Western? Now, Cumberbatch has responded to this criticism in a recent interview after being nominated for Best Leading Actor for his role in The Power of Dog with the British Academy of Film and Television Arts. Towards the end of the interview, he responded to a question about why it's important to portray his The Power of the Dog character, Phil Burbank, in the 21st century. Cumberbatch answered saying, because there are many of him still in the world. And I think if we're to teach our sons to be feminist, if we're to teach equality, if we're to understand what poisons the well in men, what creates toxic masculinity, we need to understand and look under the hood of characters like Phil Burbank to see what their struggle is and why that's there in the first place, because otherwise it will just keep repeating itself. Just from the get-go here, I don't think Cumberbatch really knows anything about what he's talking about, because he's actively trying to change the nature of people. He's trying to make men into feminists, which is absolutely an absurd idea to try and do. You're trying to radically change the nature of man. He's trying to go against nature. And the idea of equality does not exist. Just look around, look at the world around you. No one is equal to anyone else. Now, you can have equality under the law, and we can hope to try and achieve that, but the idea that other people are going to be equal to each other is not true. It cannot be true. And that is actually a very toxic idea, as we've seen that idea spread like wildfire and just really ruin a lot of people. And it clearly looks like it's ruined Benedict Cumberbatch, as we'll find out later on. But he continues and says, and while we're thankfully moving into a space now where survivors are being heard and supported and protective, we've got a way to go on that still, don't get me wrong, but I think we also have to look at the root cause of the behavior that these people have suffered from. He then specifically addresses Sam Elliott, but doesn't name him. He's a coward. He says, and this man, trying very hard not to say anything about a very odd reaction that happened the other day on a radio podcast over here, I'm assuming he's in the United States. Without meaning to sort of stare over the ashes of that, I won't get into the details of it. If it's hit the news at home, it has here. But someone really took offense to, I haven't heard it, so it's unfair really for me to comment in detail on it, but really took offense to the West being portrayed in this way. So I'm going to stop it here. He's not really going to go into detail to comment on it, but that's exactly what he does, and he admits that he actually hasn't even heard what Sam Elliott said. He's probably only read headlines or maybe read snippets of what he said and hasn't actually listened to his criticism. So Cumberbatch continues saying, and beyond that reaction, that sort of denial that anybody could have any other than a heteronormative existence because of what they do for a living or where they're born, there's also a massive intolerance within the world at large towards homosexuality still, towards an acceptance of the other or any kind of difference. And no more so, I guess, in the prism of conformity in the sense of what is expected of a man in the sort of the Western archetype mold of masculinity. And so I think to deconstruct that through Phil, to look at that, it's not a history lesson. So he clearly is admitting that this film is basically to deconstruct the Western archetype mold of masculinity, and that's exactly what this film apparently does, according to Benedict Cumberbatch. And this follows the pattern of what we see Hollywood doing all the time. They're all about deconstruction, and honestly, they're all about trying to degrade, downplay, and remove what it means to be masculine. And it appears, according to Cumberbatch's own words, that is what they aim to do in this film, and he seemingly thinks that they accomplished that. But if you thought his response couldn't get any more mind-boggling, he then brings up Russia and, of course, Donald Trump, because that's what these Hollywood actors do. This is what he says. And I mean, need we look much further than what is going on in Russia at the moment to understand that somewhere in the mind-boggling idiocy of that man's megalomania is some damage. There's some damage there, and we saw it in a president of the country that's hosting me at the moment. Like, this guy is a coward. He can't even name these people's names. Like, it's not that hard to say Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. I mean, what are you trying to accomplish here? He's trying to beat around the bush by not naming their names. It's just utterly ridiculous, and it just shows the kind of just nonsense he's just spewing here. But anyways, he goes on to say, these people still exist in our world, and whether it's on our doorstep, or whether it's down the road, or whether it's someone we meet in a bar or a pub, or in a sport on the sports field, there is aggression and anger and frustration, and an inability to control or know who you are in that moment that causes damage to that person. And as we know far more openly now, as I was saying, damage to others around them. I don't think being aggressive, being angry, or being frustrated is limited to the idea of what masculinity is. And I think there is the rub, right? Cumberbatch has an idea of what masculinity is, and this is his idea that he thinks he's trying to combat against. Again, he really doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't think he really understands what being masculine is, and the fact that they're trying to deconstruct what being masculine is, when you don't even know what it is a lost cause. And now he's trying to defend that lost cause. So he goes on to assert, I think there's no harm in looking at a character to try and get to the root causes of that. I mean, this is a very specific case of repression, but also due to an intolerance, a societal intolerance for that true identity that Phil has, that he can't fully be. But I think the more we look under the hood of toxic masculinity and try to discover the roots of it, the bigger the chances we have of dealing with it when it arises with our children in playgrounds at school, with our friends, and the behavioral patterns that we might see in innocent play, and just understand how to police that, how to teach something that includes their feelings and holds them in that emotional space so they can be what they are being in that moment, but not cause damage to themselves or others. I don't know about you, but I really have no idea what he is trying to say here. It's all a bunch of like words kind of combined together to make sentences, but none of it really actually makes any sense. Maybe I'm just unable to comprehend what he's saying and you can understand it a little bit better, and maybe that fault's on me, but I really don't know what he is trying to convey here saying this. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Interestingly, Cumberbatch would then be asked if the solution is as simple as talking. And he actually admits, he says here, it's very easy to talk in a webinar about films and with like-minded artistic folk. It's much harder to go up to the guy at the bar who wants to glass you and go, hey, look, I'm really sorry things haven't worked out for you. It's very hard to know how to mediate it within real life. I think that's one of the great things we get to do as storytellers in culture, is to be able to siphon it into metaphor, to sort of let the light peek through the crack a little bit, and just hopefully it might touch someone or ignite a conversation about it that might reach someone like that. He then elaborated saying, it's much harder to go out and kind of billboard that as a problem because, of course, the massive aggression and defensiveness you'll meet with that, as well as the fist or the weapon or whatever it might be, it doesn't necessarily find a good space and a time to be aired in everyday life. And I think that's why art and storytelling of any kind, whether it's a sung lyric or someone speaking of their own experience, a lived experience, or whether it's a piece of art or poetry or film, could sometimes do that. He then reiterated, I really do believe that. Again, without sounding too pretentious, I just think that is one of the things that art categorically is socially, societally incredibly important for at every level. At every level. And that's why I think I'm supposedly very passionate about it, being something that's introduced to kids at school and that's funded properly, and that's something that is part of the growing experience for these kind of messages and ways of examining problems to happen in a safe way, in a metaphor or parable, he concluded. So to me, this part, he's clearly saying he wants to use movies and art as propaganda to change people's way that they view the world. And that's exactly and he's not making any bones about it. He's actually saying that this propaganda needs to be properly funded, and he's saying it needs to be, this art and propaganda needs to be done in a way so that it's metaphor or parable, so it's not as blunt or in your face as we sometimes see a lot from Hollywood, especially in recent years. So he's making no bones about what he is, how he actually views his own career. He's basically telling you that he is a propagandist and he wants more of it, and he wants that propaganda to be funded because he wants the world to be shaped in what he views it should be. As I said at the beginning, he's actually actively rejecting nature and natural law by wanting men to be feminists. Let me know what you think. My name is John Trent, and you've been watching Bounding into Comics.